Every punch landed perfectly, but the target didn't fight back. Still, Thomas felt uneasy, even though he was totally in control of the fight. Then it clicked. What really bothered him were the beast's eyes. The creature's stare stayed the same throughout the battle. It didn't react even when getting pounded. It was like the beast was daring Thomas to give it his all. Angry, Thomas clenched his fists and held them up high. His shoulder muscles flexed as magic surged through his shoulders, arms, wrists, and fists. This was gonna end it. Could the beast survive a direct hit from Demolish? With a loud shout of Demolish, Thomas swung both arms down as hard as he could. In that split second, his opponent's eyes flickered and changed. They shifted from human eyes to something wild and beastly. The beast didn't even flinch as it blocked Thomas's strongest attack with just one hand. Huh? Thomas stared in shock, his hands frozen in midair. A shiver ran down his spine. The creature's deep voice rumbled. Not bad for a puppet of a fragment. Thomas frowned, confused by the strange growl-like words. Then, something weird happened. Its black hair suddenly turned snowy white, and started growing super long. His nails turned into sharp claws, his teeth got pointy, and white fur covered him completely. A werewolf. But no one had seen a white werewolf in the past 10 years. What? What are you? Thomas felt a chill from the powerful magic right in front of him. Instead of answering, the beast squeezed his hand harder, cracking the bones. Crack. Arg half. Everyone was shocked to hear Thomas, one of the best hunters worldwide, cry out in pain. A news helicopter buzzed overhead, catching every moment of Thomas's struggle. He was a top hunter who had come to Seoul to stop a monster that had appeared in the city famous for its massive gate. But now it looked like he was the one in trouble. But how? People whispered, watching either in person or on screens. Everyone hoped this wasn't the end. But their hopes were crushed as the creature grabbed Thomas's wrist and slammed him to the ground with a loud epsplam. This time, the monster stood over Thomas, pinning him down. Arg, Thomas groaned, coughing up blood. His broken hand tried to fight back, but he was no match for the beast's true form. The creature pressed Thomas's head into the ground, and let out a deafening roar. Gressa. The sound was so loud, it felt like thunder, shaking the whole city and sending chills down everyone's spine. Beasts weren't here to mess around.
They were hunters, not fighters.
The beast let out a mighty roar, packed with powerful magic. And one by one, the other hunters dropped to their knees. The beast let out a sly chuckle.
Scared. It's haunted.
Most predators love the thrill of the chase, but Thomas wasn't backing down. Even though his hand was broken, he gritted his teeth, clenched his fist, and swung with all his might.
At Powers.
The punch connected, but the beast didn't even flinch. When Thomas stared into the beast's cold eyes, they felt like a giant wall that went on forever. No feelings, no emotions, just a blank stare. It felt familiar, weirdly familiar. He couldn't place it at first, but then it hit him. Those empty eyes reminded him of Jin-Woo. Why was that? Before he could figure it out, the beast started throwing punches that snapped his head from side to side. Ba-bam! Thomas's ears rang. Gah! He groaned, stumbling back. But the beast wasn't done yet. Thud! 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 The punches came fast and hard, like a whirlwind of fists pounding him relentlessly. Thomas tried to defend himself, but it was no use. He was getting pounded from all sides. The world around him became a blur, as he staggered back, his head spinning, and his breath coming in ragged gasps. He went on an unstoppable rampage, almost like he was showing off how to throw a proper punch. Pow, 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 and even though the beast didn't flinch from being hit, Thomas cried out with each punch he took. The beast seemed to enjoy causing pain, but then noticed something behind Thomas. It stepped back, staring closely at Thomas's shadow. I see there's a rat hiding here. Schlup. The beast dove his hand into Thomas's shadow and snatched something. Shoop. He pulled out an ant shadow soldier who squirmed wildly in his tight grip. Skral. These shadow monarch soldiers were tough to beat, but the beast holding this one was way stronger than normal. The Fang Monarch, a powerful ruler, summoned his energy to wipe the ant soldier out completely. Gah! The tiny creature cried out before crumbling into ashes that scattered in the wind. The beast watched with a smirk as the gray dust disappeared. Meanwhile, Thomas managed to sneak up and grab the beast from behind, locking it in a tight headlock. It wasn't over until the very end. Even with his broken hand, Thomas could still use his arms and shoulders. He squeezed with all his might hard enough to crush a metal pipe. Huff, 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 huff. Thomas panted like crazy, trying to catch his breath as he focused on the attack. There was no turning back now. If Thomas let go now, there was no coming back. His eyes squinted tight, his jaw locked in a fierce grind. Then came that spine-chilling crack, sharp, loud, and unforgettable. It sounded like someone twisting a giant walnut, until it shattered into pieces. Thomas froze, unsure if it was the beast's neck snapping or something else. Wait, yes, he felt a surge of hope. But then, the rush faded. Agony exploded through his arm. The beast had crushed the arm, wrapped around its neck, and now Thomas was screaming. Arg! He bellowed, his voice echoing in the air. The world around him started spinning like a mad carousel. His vision blurred as the pain washed over him in waves. The beast grabbed Thomas by the head and slammed it against the ground. Half people watching the scene on screens had to look away as Goliath's arm flopped around lifelessly. It was super gross, but things only got worse from there. The beast jumped onto Thomas's helpless body and started chomping down with its sharp, knife-like teeth. Thomas screamed. Ah! Ah! Half fought back with all his might. But it didn't seem like he had any chance. Blood burst out everywhere and bits of flesh scattered all around. "Parha!" shouted someone in horror. The hunters who were supposed to be keeping civilians back stumbled away, looking totally grossed out. The regular people had already run off, super scared. But then one hunter jumped from the crowd and slammed into the monster. Cute it. The beast was caught off guard because it was too busy enjoying its victory, and the stuff it had stolen. Thomas saw Leonard hovering over his body and tried to warn him. Run. Leonard bolted forward, shaking his head firmly. I'm a hunter too, he said, his voice steady. Sure, Thomas was stronger than him, but Leonard had made a sworn promise to himself when he became a hunter. No matter what, he'd never leave an ally behind. Thomas wasn't part of their guild, but in Leonard's eyes, he was still a loyal ally. After all, they were fighting the same enemy, and that made them a team. No matter what Thomas thought of him, Leonard couldn't back down. Just looking at the beast made his legs shake like crazy. The creature growled furiously, clearly upset that its meal had been interrupted. Thomas noticed how scared the German hunter was, and struggled to speak. You'll, the bee, killed, he warned. Leonard knew that all too well. Leonard had left his gear behind, and his strongest move, charge, barely even made the monster flinch. People called him things like Germany's strongest or the 12th best hunter in the world, but none of that mattered now. No regrets though. Even if this was the end for Leonard, he knew he'd make the same choice over and over again. It's better to die with honor than to live without courage. Leonard kept repeating this in his head, as death came charging at him. This was the right decision. The beast appeared in an instant, its enormous mouth wide open, ready to swallow him whole. With all his strength, Leonard threw a punch. In that moment his heart raced, and he could see moments from his past flashing by, memories of laughter, battles, and everything that had led him here. This was the right decision. His life hadn't exactly been tough, thanks to his amazing powers. He'd led a good life, right? Leonard grinned as he stared into the beast's gaping mouth. This was definitely the right move. He'd lived with pride until the very end. Closing his eyes, he figured this was it. No more opening them again. But then, bang! Leonard's eyes popped open. What just happened? The beast had been blasted like a rag doll, flying dozens of meters away from his punch. It crashed to the ground, dazed and confused. Leonard stared in shock. Wait, did he really just do that? The asphalt road was busted. Cars were pushed aside, and some streetlights were bent weirdly. Huh? He muttered, confused. Had he somehow done all this without even knowing? He stared at his fist in disbelief, then suddenly noticed someone standing right next to him. His eyes widened in surprise. Whoa! Leonard jumped back, nearly tripping over his own feet. Then his face lit up with a huge grin. No way, he shouted, his voice full of excitement, as he stared at the person beside him. Hunter Jin-Woo sung. He'd cut it way too close. Luckily Jin-Woo had set up a shadow soldier with Leonard when he visited the guild office earlier. If he hadn't done that, he probably wouldn't have made it here on time. Everything changed when the shadow soldier attached to Thomas disappeared. Without hesitation, Jin-Woo used shadow exchange with the only other soldier nearby, barely slipping into place just in time. Who would have guessed that Lennart's axe would end up saving the day? Thanks to that, he managed to rescue both men. Jin-Woo let out a deep breath of relief as he quickly checked Thomas's injuries. They were bad, but Thomas was going to make it through. Too weak to speak, Thomas just looked up at Jin-Woo, who nodded silently, grateful for the time the American had bought him. Then Jin-Woo turned around and found himself face to face with an emotional Lennart. "Hunter-sung," Lennart exclaimed, his voice full of gratitude. Thank you for stopping that monster." "Hey, can you take Thomas somewhere safe?" Jin-Woo asked Lennart nicely in English. Lennart smiled big. "No problem at all," he said with a grin. "I've got this covered." He helped Thomas up gently and hurried off. Jin-Woo then faced the monster, which was slowly getting back on its feet. He was giving off super intense anger, and you could tell he was way different from other magic beasts. I knew it. My guess was right. This guy had the same kind of energy as that ancient ice elf Jin-Woo had run into before. He was one of the monarchs, and they were after the hunters. But unlike the ice elf, there wasn't a trace of fear on his face. He was calm as could be. Despite the interruption, the beast seemed calm, almost relaxed. Why was that? He looked like a mix between a human and a wild animal, but was surprisingly calm. Jin-Woo wondered about this as the beast stepped out of the rubble. He swirled something around in his mouth before spitting out broken teeth. The beast couldn't hide his shock. "So, it's true," he said. The shadow creature caught a whiff of something interesting, a mix of human scent, and something way weirder. The beast sniffed the air, curious. But how is just a regular person able to tap into that much power from such a high level? Jin-Woo just grinned. "I leveled up, jerk," he said, pulling out Kanisha's wrath. He had a million questions for these so-called monarchs, but they'd have to wait. First things first, he was taking down this beast. Jin-Woo's anger boiled over as he scanned the street littered with victims. A chilling voice cut through the air beside him. "The architect must have found a way," it said. "The Shadow Monarch and the architect have been working together for a while now." The mist around them swirled, taking shape until a figure stood before them. Is that? It was the ancient ice elf. The Frost Monarch stepped out of the thick fog, revealing himself at last. Jin-Woo had suspected something was off about the fog. As soon as he encountered it, it felt strange, almost alive. Then a sharp voice echoed from behind him. "Does this mean I can have that human for myself?" Jin-Woo turned to see who was speaking, and was shocked by what he found. A buzzing sound filled the air as insects poured out of the sewers, swarming together until they formed a towering woman. Her presence was both fascinating and terrifying, leaving Jin-Woo stunned at the sight before him. "I've always wondered what another monarch tasted like." Jin-Woo scowled as enemies closed in from every side. His shadow soldiers hadn't stayed quiet to keep things stealthy. They were hiding how many there really were. It was a trap, and Jin-Woo was the bait. Suddenly, emergency alerts popped up in front of him. "The Frost Monarch, King of the Snow Folk, has marked you as an enemy. Chunur the Fang Monarch, King of Beasts, has marked you as an enemy. Pop the Plague Monarch, Queen of Insects, has marked you as an enemy." Top 3 super powerful enemies revealing themselves at once. The black heart inside Jin-Woo roared to life. Thump thump thump, this was, top thump. Jin-Woo flashed a sly grin. The bad guys thought they had him cornered, but he wasn't alone, not by a long shot. In fact, it was the monarchs who were really trapped. Jin-Woo stayed sharp, watching every move the monarchs made as he called out his team. "Come on out," he shouted. The world held its breath as the monarchs launched their pincer attack. From New York to London, Shanghai to Paris, life in these bustling cities ground to a halt. People stopped in their tracks, stunned, as breaking news about a disaster in Seoul, Korea's capital, flashed on screens everywhere. After a huge gate appeared there recently, word of this new attack spread like wildfire. TV networks around the world cut into their regular shows to bring live updates. Viewers were shocked by the aerial footage showing the bloody streets of Seoul. If such a busy city was in this state, what chance did others have? This made the tragedy hit close to home, which is probably why seeing Thomas Andre brought comfort. Foreign reporters shouted his name excitedly while they filmed. The crowd clapped together, cheering for Thomas with all their might. Everyone watching urged him on as he seemed to be getting the upper hand. Shouts filled the air, "Hit him harder. Yeah, show him who's boss. And take him down. Take down Goliath." But everything went silent when Goliath's fist was smashed. His arm snapped, and blood hit the ground. Hands that had been raised high in victory now dropped to their sides. Some people cried quietly as they watched the greatest warrior of all time struggle. It felt like everything had stopped. No one could believe what was happening. Everyone seemed to forget how to breathe. They wished they could wake up from this terrible moment, but Thomas's painful cries kept echoing through the speakers. Their faces fell in despair. Just when everything seemed hopeless, a hunter who looked European charged towards the beast and pushed him back. Then, another hunter with black hair appeared suddenly next to him. Everyone watching, including the reporters, was totally confused about what was happening. What just happened? Who were those two people? The cameras couldn't catch their faces because everything went down so fast and from so far away. But there was no mistaking the black soldiers flooding the street. It had to be Hunter Jin-Woo Sung, someone shouted. Others joined in, cheering and waving their hands excitedly. Even without seeing his face, everyone knew who it was just by looking at those black soldiers. Goliath may have fallen, one fan yelled, but Hunter Sung is here now. His army has the monsters surrounded. The streets of Seoul were packed with Hunter's followers in black, and people all around the world were high-fiving and screaming with joy. It was like a big victory party, and everyone was invited. Imagine how heartbroken Americans must have felt when their top hunter Thomas lost. But then they found out about Jin-Woo's epic raid on Jeju Island, and suddenly everyone was super hyped. Their cheers were so loud they could probably be heard in space. By now, Jin-Woo's video had already been seen by over 2 billion people basically. There wasn't a single person who didn't know his name. The whole world went wild. Hey! I know that other guy. I know exactly who he is. Someone shouted, trying to sound smart. But even that person couldn't resist joining in, as everyone chanted Jin-Woo's name over and over. The entire world was glued to Jin-Woo Sung, amazed by what they were witnessing. His shadow army formed a circle around him, and the three monarchs, creating an epic sight that no one would ever forget. On a street covered in shadows by Monarch's domain, the army spirits were soaring higher than ever before. Jin-Woo checked each monarch's reaction one by one. They seemed pretty amused. The female giant, made entirely of insects, looked around the street and let out a snicker. Is this really their new shadow army? She asked. The Frost Monarch stepped forward, his voice cold as ice. There's a lot of them, but they're all over the place. He took a deep breath, letting out a long icy howl. Orage. Instantly, everything above ground froze, including every single soldier in the shadow army. Jin-Woo could only stand there, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. What just happened? He muttered to himself. In a flash, the monarchs took down Jin-Woo's soldiers. He'd faced Balin in the demon castle before, but that was just one foe. Now, 3 monarchs were against him. It was a huge challenge. He tried to summon his soldiers to free them from the ice, but it didn't work. The Frost Monarch felt sure they'd win with Jin-Woo's army trapped. The icy grip held tight, leaving no escape. Jin-Woo's anger didn't let up even after his defeat. He glared at the Frost Monarch, gripping Kamish's wrath tightly in his hand. You're going to die today, he growled, his voice cold and fierce. The Shadow Army was strong, but Jin-Woo couldn't use them now. That didn't matter. Jin-Woo wasn't about to let the Frost Monarch escape alive. He was ready for a fight. The Frost Monarch glared at Jin-Woo with a scowl. His shoulder throbbed from the wound Jin-Woo had given him earlier. You pest. He snarled, his voice sharp with anger. With a swift motion of his hand, the ground beneath them began to shimmer. From the icy surface rose towering golems, their bodies made entirely of ice. At the same time, the Queen of Insects let out a piercing whistle. The corpses scattered around the battlefield started to squirm and twist. Crackling sounds filled the air as bones snapped and rearranged themselves. Limbs contorted in unnatural ways, forming strange creatures that skittered on 4 legs like spiders. But these weren't undead. Something far stranger had taken over their bodies. The bodies were being controlled by weird creatures that had crawled into their brains. Jin-Woo noticed the strange magic coming from bugs moving inside the skulls of the dead people. He turned to the Queen of Insects and said, You think we killed them without a reason? The queen had planted a special egg in each person the monster had killed. When those eggs hatched, they became super creepy parasites that took over the humans' bodies. Golems and parasites? No way. Jin-Woo realized he couldn't turn his enemy's armies into shadow soldiers after all. It hit him hard. These monarchs had been preparing for this moment forever. He let out a deep breath. Whew. And now the golems and those creepy court soldiers were moving past the frozen troops, heading straight for Jin-Woo. The hunter focused on his heartbeat. And ba-dump, ba-dump, ba-dump. And he had survived so many dangers to make it this far. Jin-Woo closed his eyes tight. His super sharp senses picked up every tiny movement from the enemy. He could sense even the tiniest movements, and he knew exactly what to do. Here they come. Ow. When Jin-Woo opened his eyes again, the human spiders were right on top of him. Time seemed to slow down, as the Kamish's wrath daggers sliced through the air with a sharp zipping sound. Shkrishk, shkrishk. The human spiders that had jumped at him were cut clean in half mid-air. With a quick kick, Jin-Woo sent a golem flying away. He leaped into the air and scanned the battlefield for his main target, the Frost Monarch. The annoyed monarch pointed at Jin-Woo and squawked furiously at the clunky ice giants, but they were way too slow to catch him. With a burst of speed, Jin-Woo rocketed himself toward the Frost Monarch, using ruler's authority, moving so fast, he seemed to teleport right in front of the surprised ruler. Jin-Woo whipped his dagger through the air, aiming straight for the creature's face. Its skin was as rough as an ancient tree's bark, but he wasn't scared. The blade zoomed in fast, ready to strike. Bang! As something tough blocked it. The Fang Monarch sneered, showing off his sharp teeth covered in blood and flesh. Do you really think that little knife can hurt me? Jin-Woo just smiled. Before the monster could react, a dark glow surrounded the dagger. Chunk! The blade sliced through the beast's wrist like it was paper. The creature roared in pain, as Jin-Woo stepped back, victorious. The Fang Monarch almost got sliced when a blade came flying at him. He leaned back sharply, just in time. But the blade still nicked his chest. Then Jin-Woo felt something powerful nearby. He looked up to see the Queen of Insects winding up for a punch loaded with magic energy. With a whoosh, Jin-Woo dropped down and raised his hand to block her fist with ruler's authority. But, wow, she was strong. He barely held on as her punch slammed into his shield with a loud pow. The force sent a shockwave through the air, knocking over the creepy human spiders nearby. But more human spiders took their place and scurried after him. Jin-Woo stomped on one of their heads and leaped into the air. He gathered his energy on Kamish's wrath.
This is it.
The dark energy swirling around his dagger buzzed so much it warped the air.
Russell.
Jin-Woo roared, swinging his dagger with all his might. Jin-Woo glanced to the side just in time to see a giant palm hurtling toward him. Its shadow covered his face. Oh no. There was no way to dodge it, so he could only brace himself for impact. The Queen of Insects smacked Jin-Woo like he was a bug. Thud. The hit was so powerful that even the buildings across the street. Jin-Woo struggled out of the debris but collapsed on the ground, panting. Gah. He was dazed, his ears ringing,